This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Audible. Stay tuned for an offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Thursday, April 2nd, 2019, and my guest is Steve Litchfield. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I am locked in like most of the world and being driven slowly but surely stir crazy by the rest of the household, but don't tell them that. Otherwise, I'm fine, thank you.
That sounds pretty normal, I think, for a lot of folks right now. And unfortunately, this is what we have to do. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for hanging in there. And yeah, it's pretty rough. So I have you on because photography on phones, as you know, as everybody should know, this is a big deal for both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you and I have been banging heads about camera phones since 2004, 2005-ish. Wow.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
For sure. So there's a few phones specifically I want to talk about. Some that you have, some that you don't, some that I have, some that I don't. So some of it is going to be, you have experience, but I don't. Some of it we both have experience, some of it, the other way around. But I feel that we're well informed enough now from others' coverage, etc., to make really good decisions and form opinions. So here's my thing that I want to discuss. Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra, S20, 20 Plus, I want to throw them in there because of their, what I'd like to call very problematic telephoto, quote-unquote telephoto. And then I want to talk about the Huawei P40 Pro, which I know you don't have yet, but I don't have a S20 Ultra, so you do. And then I don't know if you have time with the Oppo Find X2 Pro at all.
We don't really see Oppo here very much at all. I've got all the specs printed out for the phones I haven't played with, by the way, Miriam. So hopefully I'm ready to go in terms of imaging at least. And yeah, I've got a Huawei P40 Pro arriving tomorrow. And I've of course played at length with the Galaxy S20 and S20 Ultra 5G. So I can talk about some of it.
Let's start with the phone that you've played with, the ones you've played with, the S20 series in general. Because I'm missing the experience with the Ultra. And to be honest with you, it is now April 2nd. I still do not have a review in it. Samsung will not send me one. The operators, carriers here in the US are locked down. Obviously, their offices are, and they're all working from home. And they were very kind, because I have good relationships with all of the operators, to say, Miriam, we're not at the office. We're not in a position to send you review units right now. And so I'm honestly stuck short of going out, or rather, I can't go out, getting one sent to me by buying it online, and then returning it within a time period, like I did with the Galaxy Z Flip. I don't have one. But I have enough of an idea, and I honestly don't feel like I'm going to bother with it now, because I think the general consensus, and this is what I really want to hear from you, is this is a flawed imaging device.
Yeah, the Ultra has some redeeming qualities. The 108 megapixel main camera reminds me so much of that old Nokia Lumia 1020, in that it does the whole oversampling stroke, a pixel binning so well, 9-to-1 pixel reduction, so you get almost no noise, really pure images. And for once, Samsung hasn't really overdone the sharpening and the edge enhancement. I was really quite impressed by the main camera, apart from the fact that it's just got phase detection autofocus, which means it's quite slow to focus, which I think a lot of people, they're used to much faster dual pixel autofocus and laser autofocus, and they don't quite know what to do when a phone doesn't quite nail the focusing. Whereas, of course, you and I go back so many years, we're kind of used to making allowances. The other thing is that with a really large sensor and a large aperture, the S20 Ultra, the depth of field is so small that you can take a photograph of something that's a foot away, and only part of it will be in focus. But that's just physics. There's nothing you can do about that. That's not a Samsung failing. I think it's just that's how optics work.
Absolutely. And so my question to you was, what's the f-stop on that main sensor? Because that will also affect, I've noticed that with these larger sensors, they're going to, smaller apertures, higher f-stops, because it's physically impossibly to manufacture a Z-stack, like a camera optics that are, very shallow, which they need to be for thin phones. What is it on the Ultra?
It's f/1.8, but remember that the apertures are not absolute, though that is relative to the sensor size. So f/1.8,
that's what I'm saying, right?
It's larger than f/1.8 on a much smaller camera unit.
Yeah, and that's why the shallow depth of field you're talking about. And so don't let that alarm you too much. But it's still technically letting in less light than, say, last year's phenomenal Honor 20 Pro, which was f/1.4 on the main lens, which was gorgeous when I used it out at Burning Man. Like, it was amazing. It was almost as good as a P30 Pro, honestly.
Yeah.
And that had the Sony IMX586, which is an interesting sensor that will come up in discussion with the Oppo in a few minutes. So I got the feeling from everything I read and people who I talked to and, that have some good experience with imaging, that the Ultra's main camera, the only issue really is autofocus. Yeah. And that the rest is really sorted. Like, as you said, this is, out of all the Samsung cameras we're going to discuss today, probably the only one that doesn't over-sharpen and over-process and make everything look like hell.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly right. Samsung realized that they had a really good thing going here. Again, this sort of pure view computational photography, taking 9:1 gives you incredible scope for getting rid of defects and noise, which means you don't need to do.
So what is the effective pixel size at 9:1?
0.8 microns multiplied by 9, so whatever that works out to be.
By 3, it'd be by 3.
Yeah. So you're talking about 2.5 microns, yeah.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, that would definitely do the trick, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll get to that. That's what the Oppo does as well with its IMX 689 sensor, which is native 1.12 micron.
Yeah.
So you multiply by 2 because it's 4 to 1.
Yeah.
And it now has 2.24 micron pixels.
Yeah.
But anyway, tell me quickly what your thoughts are on the other two lenses, particularly the zoom, because this is the only Samsung Galaxy S phone that technically, effectively, really has an optical zoom. And we'll get to that when we talk about the other two.
Yeah. There's nothing really wrong with the main sensors, we just said. So let's put that to one side. The updates will improve autofocus, hopefully, but there are limits. And you have to, if you work within the limits, the main sensor, I think, is they've done a good job. The whole thing needs to be cheaper, but they've done a good job. The periscope system is interesting because the main sensor takes you from 2.2 times zoom, lossless zoom, crop zoom, up to about 3, maybe 3.5, but that's not too bad because the optical kicks in at 4 times, which is actually a nice step up. You lose there's a bit of fuzziness just below 4 times, but 4 times optical, plus you get another step up to 5 times with crop zooming on that 48 megapixel periscope sensor, and then you've got up to 10 times hybrid if you want to go to software zoom as well. But effectively, think of the periscope as a 4 times optical, and it produces very good results. Overall, I cannot emphasize this enough. If the S20 Ultra 5G had been £500, $500 cheaper, it would be a no-brainer to say this is the best imaging phone in the world. But it's just the fact that there are compromises, and it's just so damned expensive.
And I honestly think that you and I, as you said, can certainly handle the autofocus issues, but I think that's completely unacceptable to the modern user today. The person who is trying to capture pictures of their children as they're running around the house in questionable light, like, you cannot have slow autofocus. And it's particularly obvious to me in video, which is not my thing that I care about that much, but a lot of people do. And so it's vexing when you see the price on top of that, right? It's like, I think you're right. I don't want to dismiss and downgrade just because I think I've given up on getting a device myself to review, at least for the time being. I don't want to dismiss what Samsung's done here. First, sensor to bin 9:1.
Yeah.
First, periscope zoom on a mainstream device. Like, in Europe, you've had the P30 Pro as a legitimate mainstream device available. We haven't. So we have not seen a folded lens on anything yet. And so I think this is important. I think folded lenses matter. And we're going to talk about the P40 Pro Plus in a minute, because I think they're kind of doing the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I think you're right about the autofocus in terms of this being a mass market device. But I think Samsung just needs to get its marketing straight. If it's going to go down this route of having just phase detection autofocus and nothing else fancy, no dual pixel, no laser autofocus, it's got to say this can be one of the best imaging phones in the world. But there are this is who it's for, and pitch it as Nokia did back in that Lumia 1020 day by saying, this is an imaging phone for taking great photographs. It's not something you snap your kids and your dog with. This is what phone for someone who knows what they're doing with imaging and can work with a camera unit this large. Maybe it's just a marketing thing at the end of the day.
Yeah. What's the sensor size again? It's so 1/1.3?
Yes, 1/1.33, which is it's one of the larger ones out there in the world at the moment.
But Huawei's got them beat. So let's talk about that in a minute.
Just.
And trust me, I haven't had enough time because of the stay at home to go out there and do photos with the P40 Pro, like as I'd like. But oh my God, that sensor.
Yep.
I think, and we'll get to that, but I think that Huawei is making the perfect compromise between pixel size and pixel count, and it is blowing my mind. It is absolutely outstanding, with all the caveats of a usual RYYB sensor, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah,
but anyway.
And the P40 Pro, of course, has this new, quote, omnidirectional face detection autofocus, which it sounds like it's based on the same technology, but it actually involves focusing face detection across the whole sensor.
It is
at
so
once.
fast that autofocus, it is insane.
Yeah.
But here's a question for you. You talked about the fact that the main sensor on the Ultra is still used for zooming up to 3.3 times, you said? Right?
Yeah, technically it's 2.2 times lossless, and then obviously up to 3.9. They try and use it with some software interpolation.
So here's a crazy idea. They have 108 megapixels to play with. They're binning 9:1 when they're taking main photos, probably in low light in particular. And I'm sure there's a pure 108 megapixel mode that's insane. But why not bin 4:1 when you're cropping a little bit to get that intermediate amount of binning on the main lens before you hit the periscope for like 2.2, 3.1, whatever.
There isn't really pixel binning. Once you've got to 2.2 times lossless, you're down to 1:1 on the sensor. So anything beyond...
Oh, you're already down to 1:1 at 2.2?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It goes that fast. I didn't realize.
This is maths.
So wait. So before 4, like in that gray area between 2.2 and 4, what's happening?
Samsung has always been very good at interpolative software zoom, as you know. Their zoom algorithms are excellent, and up to 3 times 3.3, 3.5, it's really pretty good. There is a slight loss in quality, but you have to be pixel peeping like you and I would do to notice. And then, of course, you hit 4 times, the periscope takes over, and then you're away.
Back in a different lens. Do we know what sensors they're using? Obviously, the 108 is a Samsung sensor. There's no doubt about that. But I'm wondering if the 48 is an IMX5HX from Sony.
Sadly, the person I borrowed it from would not let me take it apart to find out. I have no idea.
Well, Jerry Rig Everything, Zach, we should watch his video about that. He might actually know. But I have a hunch that it is a Sony sensor and not a Samsung sensor.
Okay.
Because Samsung has done this in the past where when they have multiple sensors on a flagship, for ease of procurement, they don't put all their eggs in the Samsung basket. So what about the ultra-wide on that phone? It's a regular ultra-wide, nothing fancy? Does it have a large sensor, anything? I think it's 12. Like, I'm talking about the count, not the actual physical surface area.
Yeah, 12 megapixel. But then I think with ultra-wide shots, as long as a phone has got an ultra-wide and it takes reasonable shots, you're not too worried about the exact specifications and the exact performance. You're not going to be doing ultra-wide at night and low light, are you? So
no.
I think it's fine.
I mean, I kind of disagree with that. I kind of want to, but you're not going to, mostly because you know it's going to look like hell.
Indeed.
But you want to. I mean, now that I've had a Mate 30 Pro for a while, and now the P40 Pro, that both have a 40 megapixel RGB ultra-wide sensor, trust me, low light is happening.
Yeah, I'm eyeing up this P40 Pro spec sheet. It's arriving tomorrow, and I've just noticed the specs on that ultra-wide. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I can take ultra-wide at night with the P40 Pro.
Oh, yeah, you can. It's great. Yeah. And the Mate 30, it's basically the exact same setup they had on the Mate 30 Pro. And that ultra-wide on the Mate 30 Pro is when you finally first get an ultra-wide that does 4:1 pixel binning, that has low light capability you weren't expecting, it is liberating, trust me, because there are so many times when you're like, this would be great with ultra-wide, and you don't do the ultra-wide at night because you're kind of conditioned not to do ultra-wide at night. You know?
Yeah, it's a mindset thing. We're just not used to that being a possibility, but in theory, in the future, that might be something we do. Why not?
Yeah. So let's switch to the S20, S20 Plus. I have an S20. You have an S20. I don't have a Plus. I don't care. They're pretty much the same imaging setup. There's an extra camera on the back on the Plus. It's a depth sensor. It's not used for photography, unlike the depth sensor for the Ultra, which I believe is used for autofocus. But anyway, tell me what you think, because I have good and bad things to say, and most of them, unfortunately, are not that great.
Okay, the main sensor is fine, absolutely fine. 1/1.76 inches sensor. It's a 12 megapixel dual pixel autofocus, nice and fast. It's got OAS, the usual stuff. And it's
1.8 micron, right?
1.8 micron. Yeah, it's absolutely
That's
fine.
impressive.
Yeah, it's a very good main camera, spoilt completely by processing. It's gone completely over the top in terms of edge enhancement and sharpening. And it was just so ugly. I just literally stopped using it after I'd seen what I produced. I'm sorry, Samsung. I know they'd generally tone down the processing slightly.
It's worse in the S10.
Yeah.
It's worse in the S10
yeah.
and the Note 10, yet they have worse sensors. The low light on that sensor is incredible, but it's over-processed to death. Everything is looking like ultra sharp, like you have like this weird over-sharpening lines everywhere on everything that's aligned, on everything. And it's just, I just wish they would just fix that in a software update. Like, how hard can it be if they nail it on the Ultra? Why can't they get it right on the lesser 20 and 20 Plus, right?
If you think about going back 3 or 4 years, if you then say, Miriam, you can have a 12 megapixel f/1.8, 1/1.76, 1.8 micron pixel, dual pixel focus with OIS. You think, wow, this is going to be the camera to end all phone cameras. And if they didn't put any extra processing and sharpening, it would produce stunning results. And at the time, you'd have thought this is the second coming. And they've got this device now. The camera's excellent, and they completely ruin it in software for no reason. If they just let the pictures speak for themselves, they'd have a winner.
Exactly. And so the thing that also we should point out is there's a way to alleviate that to some extent, but you lose a lot of the multi-frame processing advantages and stuff that a modern computational photography is when you use Pro mode or manual mode. Yeah. It seems to help a lot. What is the f-stop on the main camera on the S20?
f/1.8.
Oh, that's odd, though. That is odd. That sensor's not that big. I would have liked to see an f/1.6 or 1.7 on that, but that's just me.
Well, of course, last year and the previous year they had the variable aperture or the dual aperture, and I think no idea why they've stopped doing that, but this is kind of stuck in the middle.
Exactly, and honestly, they did the same with the Z Flip, and the Z Flip actually takes better photos in my opinion than the S20 because it's the older sensor.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
It's last year's Note 10 and S10 sensor. Main sensor with an f/1.8 to kind of compromise on the no dual aperture, and honestly the processing is there. It's still very Samsung, but it's fine. I switched to the S20 and I was like, oh my goodness. But this is not my biggest gripe because I can still remedy it with Pro, and I think Samsung hopefully will listen and fix this. But my biggest gripe, oh my God. My gripe to end all gripes. The thing that is butt hurting me hard in this imaging world today is what both Samsung are doing with the S20, S20 Plus, and LG is doing with the V60 ThinQ 5G dual screen. That's a mouthful of a name. My review is going to be up on Hot Hardware, my first time writing for them. When you folks listen to this show, it's being posted right now. So the V60, to be clear, does not have a telephoto on paper at all. It has a 64 megapixel main sensor with no telephoto, and it has a dedicated ultra wide. And they're relying on that 64 megapixel sensor to do all telephoto duty. And they call it a telephoto. And it's terrible because I disagree. It is a simulated telephoto, aka a not proper dedicated telephoto. And that's what's even more egregious about the S20 is that they technically have a dedicated on paper telephoto, but it's simulated because you're the one who opened my eyes to this before I even got my S20. It's a optical zoom factor of 1.06, you said?
Either 1.06 or 1.04, depending on which maths you believe. But either way, it's not 2 times, it's not 3 times, it's not 5 times, it's 1 and a bit.
It's basically crazy. 1. So basically, you have 2 main sensors. The thing people don't understand is the S20, if you look at it, if you remove the expectation. In fact, I got so confused about this, Steve, that at the launch event, in San Francisco, when I was there and I saw the specs and I talked to the reps and I did my hands-on, I thought the 64 megapixel sensor was the main sensor. I saw 64, 12, 12, and I thought, oh, 64 is the main, 12 is the telephoto with a physical optical zoom, and 12 is the ultra wide. And it wasn't until 2 or 3 days later when I'm recording the podcast and I'm reading my notes and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. It's 12 for the main, 64 for the telephoto. And then I was like, why would they do that? And then you clued me on when you said zoom factor of 1.06 or 04. Yeah. It doesn't zoom. So they're relying on cropping a sensor, which is up to a point technically okay. And again, the LG V60 is showing the exact same symptoms and the exact same issues. It's fine up to 2x in daylight, but anything in low light, because it no longer pixel bins, is crap. Anything beyond 2x, I'd say beyond 3x, is unusable.
It's worse than that though, Miriam. Let me blow your mind here.
Please do.
That 64 megapixel, quote, telephoto, and heavily in quotes because it's not, lens, most of the pixels on that 64 megapixel sensor, most of them, 3/4 of them, are never used.
That's not true. They're used for the 64 megapixel mode.
Well, who uses
8K
that?
video.
I know I was going to come to video, but come on. Who actually needs 8K video, even in 2020? Ignoring the 8K video marketing bullet point, ignoring some nerd shooting in 64 megapixel native mode, ignoring that, normal people, 3/4 of the pixels on that telephone
wait, there's another mode. You forgot another mode that the 64 is used in. I'm trying to help Samsung here.
Go on then.
The 64 megapixel sensor is also used for the ultra stabilized 1080p video, where in addition to the OIS on that sensor, they're using a floating 1080p window that floats quite a bit.
Yeah, I think
you know what I'm saying.
I think you're working for Samsung marketing here, but okay.
No, but I mean seriously, like that's actually an interesting use case.
Yeah,
because OnePlus was the first to do this. I didn't realize that was a thing until OnePlus. Their ultra stable video on the 7 and 7T and 7, well, the entire 7 series is using the ultra wide at 1080p cropped for stabilization. Isn't that interesting?
It's interesting, but it still doesn't purge the hurt that's in my heart from just looking at the specs, using the device, and realizing how an inefficient kludge it is. It just beggars belief. So you start off, you zoom on the main sensor, and you zoom in a bit, 1.2, 1.3, you get to 1.9, still on that main 12 megapixel sensor. It's only using software, even though you've got 64 megapixel, or basically the same focal length, also trained at your subject. You don't use it at all. You only start using this, quote, telephoto that's not a telephoto, when you get to 2 times zoom, at which point you're not using most of the second lens and the second sensor. It's absolute madness, Miriam.
No, I agree. It's egregious that they call this a telephoto.
Yeah.
If they had marketed this as we have 2 main sensors, they're used for different things.
Yeah.
We have a 12 megapixel sensor, and it's optimized for normal auto photography, and then we have a 64 megapixel, and that's used for zooming. They could pixel bin it 4:1 to get 16 megapixel out of it as a main sensor, exactly like LG did. LG saved money by putting just a 64 megapixel sensor on this V60. And a lot of people are like, why would I even consider buying this when the S20 exists? And that's another story that, you can obviously read my review. But what makes the V60 appealing is the battery life is insane, and it sells for 2/3 of the price of a Galaxy S20 in the US. And it's 5G. So you get a 5G phone for $800 that is a full-on flagship Snapdragon 865 with the whole enchilada, the whole thing. The only thing it's missing to really make it a flagship is a dedicated telephoto, like actual optical zoom lens, a third lens. And it's only a 1080p display at 6.8 inches because they have this weird dual display case that they bundle with it, and the displays are identical in the case and on the phone, so they cheaped out. I mean, it's a very good display at 1080p. It's an OLED, and it's only at 60 hertz. But in a modern flagship, you expect a 90 or 120 hertz display. You expect, some resolution choices. Like whether you have to choose between high refresh and high res is one thing, but when you don't even have the option is another thing. So that was my takeaway. But the whole thing about using a 64 megapixel sensor for a telephoto, I think we're going to see more of it, Steve, and it's hurting me in my special place, okay?
If it was just that sensor, though, then and you could kind of get away with it with clever software, and you've got OIS and you've got a decent focusing system, then it's just the sheer waste of it, Miriam. It's not the fact that it doesn't work. It kind of does work, and if there wasn't too much over sharpening and edge enhancement, you could see how well it was or wasn't working. It's a bit like the Pixel 4 series with the Soli radar, which people don't really use and most people hate. You're kind of paying $100 of the bill of materials just for something you don't use. And here on this S20, the main sensor, the main camera is actually natively pretty good. It's got OIS. You could even do some stabilization with video, etc., etc. You don't actually need that second one. And if you say, okay, we need 8K video, we must have a high megapixel main sensor. Then make that the main sensor and put all the tech goodies into that. It just seems so wasteful to have both of them next to each other, overlapping and just very inefficient.
Yeah. I don't understand it. I really don't. And there's definitely a Samsung sensor that's 64 megapixel too.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at with the S20 series. And what's the ultra-wide like in your experience? Also overprocessed, but overall pretty okay?
Yeah, it's pretty okay. You don't. Again, I've never in my life pixel peeped an ultra wide shot. I'm sure you have. You're more of an ultra wide gal.
Maybe you need to, Steve. I mean, I think a lot of people. I think you're dismissing the fact that a lot of people really love it. I really love the ultra wide. If anything, I can live without telephoto, but I want an ultra wide on all my phones. It's so much fun, and I live in cities, and sometimes you just can't get far back enough to get the shot right, and it's just saving you.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultra wides are fun. I completely get why they're there, and I enjoy having them there. But they're for fun shots. They're for posting on social media. If you're actually trying to photograph, you're at a zoo and you're photographing a tiger that's 10 meters away, then you want some zoom, and you want some zoom that gives decent quality.
For sure.
So, but you don't really pixel peep. You don't really look at the quality of the ultra wide. If it's okay and if it's usable on social media, then it's okay and fun.
Yeah. So basically, the S20, if they can fix the processing, it would be okay, but right now it's a bit of a mess, and it's a very wasteful approach to imaging. And unfortunately, as I said, just for the camera count and megapixel count, the war that is out there of everybody trying to outdo one another with up to 5 cameras in the back now, we're going to see more of this BS, of this putting large sensors in the back of phones with very simple optical stacks and calling them telephotos, and with results that suck beyond 2-3x. Because these are not the kind of zooms you're used to. If you've been using a P20 Pro or a Mate 30 Pro or a Mate 20 Pro, a device that has a 3x optical or 2x optical zoom, you know how good it can be. Especially, I think, at 3x optical, you get to a point where you can do hybrid zoom up to 5x or whatever and get pretty decent results. This S20 is not it. At 5x, it looks like hell. At 10x, it's a disaster, right?
Yeah. But all of this is not why I returned my S20. I actually bought my S20, Miriam. It wasn't sent by PR. I didn't trust them to send it in time. But I returned the phone. And I returned the phone not because of the imaging, but because the in-screen ultrasonic fingerprint scanner is just appalling. And I tried it with the supplied screen protector that comes out of the factory. I tried it peeling that off and tried using it without. I tried registering double fingerprints. I tried everything, absolutely everything, and I never got beyond about 50% recognition rate. And that is not good enough when capacitive scanners on budget phones work 99.9% of the time. I'm sorry, Samsung, they have got to abandon this ultrasonic technology. It does not work.
No, I mean, that's Qualcomm's fault, really. At this point, I feel like I thought you were going to say, with the finger supplied in the package.
Might help, actually.
There's an accessory in the box. It's the finger, and you use it for the fingerprint sensor. It's actually interesting that you bring up the ultrasonic, because I don't want to dwell on this too much because I want to move on to the other 2 phones. But I have had issues lately with the fingerprint sensors on all my phones because I'm washing my hands so much, they're so dry that my skin is peeling on my thumb. So I'm having to moisturize more. And because my skin is peeling, my recognition is going down because it's getting partial prints only, right?
Yeah.
But that's across all sensors. I personally, it works for me, the ultrasonic. But I know it's very polarized. Like some people can't get it to work and some people it works. And that's just not acceptable when you're Samsung. Like you can't experiment like that, especially when it's like a second or third generation product now. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the P40 series, and particularly the P40 Pro, which I have, and the P40 Pro Plus, which is theoretical for both of us because we don't have one.
Yeah.
And we might as well lump the, I don't want to lump it into it, but it's very similar in many ways. Other than the RYYB stuff, it's very similar in many ways to the Oppo Find X2 Pro, what they're doing. They're doing very traditional things here. They're doing a large sensor for the main camera.
Yeah, yeah.
They're doing a large sensor for the ultra wide, and then they're doing a folded lens for the telephoto. And I think that's still a solid approach because the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah, I'm very looking forward to my P40 Pro arriving. Both of them say they can zoom up to 2 times losslessly with that high megapixel main sensor. And then, I guess my gripe really for both of them, I know it's a minor gripe, but I am who I am. From 2 times zoom up to 4.92 times zoom on both of them, you get progressively worse interpolative software zoom. And then again, at 5 times, the real optical kicks in, and then you get a clear shot. Right. And that is a beef for me. Quite often, a favourite zoom factor of mine is 3 times, and the phones which have a 3 times zoom is crystal clear. But to have this kind of nebulous area where you zoom in to get to zoom your nephew or niece or your pet or whatever, which is 4 or 5 meters away, and you're up at 3 times or 3.5 times zoom, and you get a completely rubbish shot because you're in that middle ground. And I do wish more manufacturers, once they go to multiple cameras, why not have a main sensor, have a 2 times telephoto, and then the main periscope 5 times, and it can juggle between the 3. That would make so much sense.
Well, your wishes have been answered with a P40 Pro Plus.
Ah, yes. How much money will that be then?
More. But let's backtrack a little bit. Okay, so here is my quick observations on the P40 Pro. Like, quickly run through things. It's in a 50 megapixel RYYB main sensor.
Yeah.
We don't know the pixel size. They haven't given us. But they've given us the sensor size, which is, get this, bigger than Samsung's at 1 over 1.28. It's almost 808 pure view size, which is 1 over 1.2, right?
Yeah. It's 2.44 microns here on the spec sheet I've got.
The f-stop on the main sensor, I believe, is
f/over 1.9 on my spec sheet here.
1.9, which is, but I've already noticed some incredibly beautiful bokeh naturally with that lens because the large sensor. And the ultra wide is interesting because it's f/over 1.8, which is amazing for an ultra wide at 40 megapixels. And that's an RGB sensor. That's, I think, pretty much the same setup we saw on the Mate 30 Pro. And then here's the kicker, and here's why I'm bringing it up now, because we want to talk about the 40 Pro Plus in a second, is that the telephoto is essentially the same telephoto as we had on the P30 Pro. 5x optical periscope folded lens with, in this case, a 12 megapixel sensor versus an 8 megapixel. Yeah. But here's the kicker. That 12 megapixel sensor is RYYB. And we don't know the pixel size, but it's definitely bigger than 1 micron. It's, I think, 1.2 or 1.4.
Yeah.
So they put a real serious sensor on the telephoto for the first time on any Huawei phone. And it pays, because in low light, this is really shining right now. And here's the thing I've noticed, Steve, that has always been an issue on Huawei phones in the past. And it's getting better, but even the Mate 30 was This seems to have solved the color science issue of switching between RGB and RYYB. Because I'm getting consistent, at least close enough to consistent, not visibly, obviously jarring differences in white balance between the 3 lenses, at least in daylight. It's harder to tell at night because, as you know, I really haven't much time to go out at night, especially in the stay-at-home thing. But I am very impressed, and the amount of light the main sensor is gathering. If you thought the P30 Pro at 40 megapixel with its smaller pixels and its faster lens and, its RYYB was good, this is a whole new level of that. So you can shoot in the dark now, no problem. You can resolve things in the resulting photos that your eye just simply could not resolve even at all, didn't even have a clue it was there.
Yeah, it's been very useful. You've now explained to me why the P30 Pro was so terrible at the colour, the white balance, and the subjects being so different from one lens to the other. And now they're both consistent using the same sensor tech. Yes, very good.
But of course, even they've somehow managed to make the RGB ultra wide consistent with that as well somehow. Like it's close. And I remember with the P30 Pro, there literally were 3 different color sciences when you switched from 3 cents. It was, and after you've used an iPhone 11 Pro for a while, which is so consistent between them, it's like night and day, right? And here's another phone, because I don't want us to run out of time, but I'm going to lump it in there real quick. The Oppo Find X2 Pro, which is the other phone I want to discuss very briefly in terms of imaging, also nails the color science. Now, it's only using RGB sensors all across 3 lenses, but it's the first Android phone where I really feel like every sensor is identical in terms of color science, like iPhone levels of identical, which even Samsung hasn't achieved yet. So kudos to Oppo.
I think iPhone 11 Pro series, I think Apple nailed the color balance matching between 3 lenses so incredibly well that every other manufacturer thought, blimey, people are actually going to expect this from our phone now, and they've actually put effort into it for the first time ever.
And Oppo, I think, is the first one to achieve that. Even better than Samsung. So, the P40 Pro, to me, this is the big news, is that big main sensor, that really incredible RYYB telephoto, and of course a very decent ultra wide. So across the board, a great phone. And as I mentioned, because we talked about it at length last week with my guest then, TK Bay, it supports 5G on 2 US carriers, the P40 Pro, which is pretty exciting, AT&T and T-Mobile. And the only big negative right now is that up to the Mate 30 Pro, I wouldn't even say up to the Honor V30 series, which came out in January, you could hack GMS back onto the phone. You could re-enable the Google mobile services by a workaround, and that workaround does not work on the P40 Pro at this time. So we do have no way right now of getting the Google apps working properly on these phones. So be aware of that. There will probably be eventually a workaround. But, in the UK, where you're now getting this phone officially, this could be a problem. I know that a lot of people dismiss it as no big deal, and that's fair. If you're that person that doesn't need to use Google services that much, I think then you don't have to worry about it. But for a lot of us who do, the workaround on these previous phones was a pretty critical part. So that doesn't exist right now.
I was been reading through the reviewers' guides and the ancillary documents for the P40 Pro. They supply that obviously before the device arrives, and for example, it's not just the Google own applications in the Play Store and Gmail. It's things like WhatsApp,
Uber,
isn't it?
WhatsApp, the Netflix, the default version of Netflix doesn't work. You have to have a special build of Netflix for Huawei, which thankfully they have.
Yeah, but it's so much of a kludge, having to literally Google for the APK of the app you want and then install the APK manually. That's crazy.
So, Steve, I'm going to let you in on a secret. It's not a secret because it's been on the podcast quite a bit now. It's my 3rd time talking about it. There is a thing out there called F-Droid, the F-Droid project, which is basically it's a collection of apps that can be installed from a single source called F-Droid. So it's like, think of it as an app store, but it's not really an app store because it doesn't contain the apps you expect. It's more like a distribution hub for really cool software made by the developer XDA type community on Android.
Okay.
So they just wanted a legitimate source for these apps, so you didn't have to download APKs randomly and feel like you were potentially getting in trouble, right? So they decided to gather together, create this thing called F-Droid, where you can find APKs that have been deemed safe, right, by the community. It's all community, self-policed, whatever. F-Droid has an app you can download on it called the Aurora Store. And the Aurora Store is, get this, it is a Google Play Store gateway. So it connects to the Google servers and gives you the access to the Google Play Store through the APIs of Google Play Store.
Wow.
It does so by creating basically a temporary Google account, disposable Google account, so that it's an anonymous connection for you, basically. They can't keep track of which apps you install and who you are. Because every time you connect, it connects to a new login.
Okay.
But the Aurora Store keeps track of which apps are installed on your phone and updates them. So it basically feels like the Google Play Store. In fact, I think the user interface is better than the Google Play Store. And you can get any app from the Google Play Store. And it behaves just like a normal app store. It's very nice, very easy, very safe. And of course, if you download a Google app at that point that is not supported on the P40 Pro, it's not going to magically work. But I'm suggesting that for those of you who live in the UK and are going to buy the P40 series, you can install the Aurora Store through F-Droid, So install F-Droid first, which you're going to have to grab the APK from the scary internet directly. And then once you get F-Droid, install the Aurora store and then connect. You have two options. You can connect with your own Google account, which eventually will get flagged as doing something illegal and your account will get deleted, which I don't suggest you do. Or you can connect anonymously, where it creates a new login every time you connect. And then you'll get everything that's in the Google Play Store. Anything you want. Everything that you're used to is there. So that's how I got Facebook, Twitter on my P40 Pro, because I don't use their transfer utility, which will transfer everything over very well. And it's great. So if I'm missing an app that I need suddenly, like a lot of apps work. Snapseed works, which is nice. You're in photo editing. That's a Google app. It works just fine. So that's what I recommend. Aurora Store. Check it out.
Well, I didn't read that in the reviewer's guide, certainly. But I have a question
for you,
Mary.
That's not, I think it's not something that, it's something that could disappear and go away tomorrow, right? Just be aware of that, because Google could clamp down on them somehow. But it right now is a much better way than going anything else, and much better than the app gallery from Huawei, much better than even the Amazon store, much better than, oh my goodness, APK Mirror, which is a godsend of a resource, but a nightmare to navigate.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I do have a question for you, Miriam, though. Given those problems with Google services and the various workarounds, why shouldn't someone just get an Oppo Find X2 Pro, which offers almost as good imaging and great specs at presumably a lower price? Presumably the Oppo has Google Play Store on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that for a second. Before we do, quickly, I want to say that the problem you were indicating earlier with the P40 Pro is also resolved with the P40 Pro Plus, which has 4 lenses in the back. Well, 5 if you count the time of flight, which, by the way, 4 lenses in the back with the regular Pro because it has a time of flight as well.
Yeah.
So you now have the 50 megapixel main sensor hasn't changed. Then the ultra wide hasn't changed. It's only 40 megapixel RGB. And then the telephoto from the Pro, which is 12 megapixel 5x with RYYB, is now replaced by 2 8 megapixel RGB sensors, with each of them a different optical zoom. One is 3x, exactly the same lens we saw on the Mate 30 Pro. And then the next one is 10x. 10x periscope. And that one we've never seen anywhere, because even the P30 Pro and the P40 Pro regular are 5x optical periscopes. So the idea here is that you have the main sensor up to 3x, then you have the 3x up to 10x, and then you have the 10x up to 100x, I guess, is what they are. They're basically trying to pull the Samsung here by doing 100x hybrid zoom.
Have you seen the cutaway drawings of that insane 10 times optical and the light path, Miriam?
I have not.
It's insane. It's like 5 reflections. It's like onto a prism, onto some different mirror, then onto a different mirror, then through another lens, and back to another mirror, then finally onto the sensor. It's absolutely insane. I'll see if you can find it for the show notes. There are several screen caps from the promotional video of the P40 Pro Plus, but I've never seen a camera that complicated in a phone. Whether you actually get any decent results and decent light collected at the end of, 5 different reflections, I don't know, but heck, it's ambitious.
Well, Leica's involved, so I'm not too worried when it comes to lenses. All right, so let's talk about the Oppo Find X2 Pro, because this, I think, is if you are mad with Samsung for their pricing for the Ultra, and you're mad with Huawei for the GMS stuff, now, this is not going to be quite as good on paper, but in my experience, having used it the longest of all of these phones we're talking about so far, because I got mine like right around the time MWC was supposed to happen. This phone is incredible. It's a very big phone. It's got a 6.7-inch display, so it's up there with the S20 Plus and S20 Ultra. Bigger than the P40 Pro, which, as you know, is like a 6.5 or something.
Yeah.
So there's a triple camera system in the back. There's a 48 megapixel, f/1.7, 1/1.43 inch main sensor with individual micron pixels of 1.12 micron. So combined 4:1 is 2.24 micron. Omnidirectional phase dense detect autofocus, laser autofocus, optical image stabilization. That is the main sensor. And the best part of it is Sony's new IMX689 sensor. And it's quad Bayer natively. So it's it's basically the evolution of the excellent and universally used, sometimes poorly, but often really well used, IMX586 from last year.
I do wonder why they need laser autofocus when they've got this omnidirectional PDAF as well.
They have it in there probably for the other lenses, because all lenses are autofocus on this phone.
Okay.
Let me get to that. So the next lens is a 5x optical zoom periscope folded lens with a 13 megapixel sensor, f/3.0, and it has 1 micron pixel, so not too crazy. Phase detect, laser, and OIS. So that's the telephoto. And honestly, that telephoto can take photos reliably up to 10x zoom, and they look great at 10x still. Like, it basically competes very well with the P40 Pro. If I put the P40 Pro next to it, the only thing is at night with the RYYB sensor on the P40 Pro, the telephoto, is where I think it has the Oppo edged out.
Yeah, those specs look pretty darn good for imaging. With that's just that one caveat which I mentioned before, is that from 2x zoom up to 4.9x zoom, you're getting progressively worse results. And it's very noticeable in the UI that as you on the zoom presets it gives you, it's obviously 1x, 2x, 5x. They try not to offer you something between, because that in between area will not be very good.
Right. And so the third lens is really exciting. Guess what? It's a ultra wide, of course. And guess what sensor they're using? Sony IMX586, last year's flagship sensor, is used on an ultra-wide with, get this, f/2.2. All right. But here's the best part. Autofocus. It can do macro shots up to like 2 centimeters from the lens or something, which is probably why they have the laser AF.
Yeah,
so
we've been having a competition
exciting
on the MeWe group about who can take the best macro shot of a 5-pence coin, and the results are pretty darn impressive, some of the shots, but I guess this is the new macro winner.
Right. So this is what you get with the Oppo Find X2 Pro. And no 8K, just like the P40 Pro. There's no 8K gimmick here. But honestly, the imaging system is solid. And my favorite thing about it, my thing that's really got me excited the most about it, is the uniformity of color science across these three lenses. It's really impressive.
Yeah.
And using a Sony IMX586, last year's really great sensor from Sony, for a ultra wide is kind of like, I think, Huawei using that 40 megapixel on their ultra wide. I think it's becoming a thing, Steve. It's becoming a thing.
Yeah, well, I think you'll be very, very happy with your ultra wide shots going forward in 2020. So
that's right.
But yeah, there's nothing to complain about. And I just noticed in the spec sheet, Miriam, the Find X2 Pro also has stereo speakers, which you still don't get in all the flagships.
Yeah, and
so
by
well
the
done,
way,
Oppo.
I mentioned the V60 from LG earlier, and as an aside, the stereo speakers on that are phenomenal. They're not doing that tweeter bass thing. It's 2 proper stereo speakers, and they sound really rich and strong because it's such a big phone. There's so much space in there. Oh man, it's so good. And then of course quad DAC on the headphone jack, which is just tremendous. Let's switch gears to the news real quick. There's a few items here. I want to take your temperature about what your thoughts are on the Mi 10, which is now officially available globally. It was launched earlier in February, I think, or even in last year at some point. So I'm getting one. They're sending me one. I don't know if they're sending me the Mi 10 or the Mi 10 Pro, but I'm excited. I'm getting played with another flagship. This is an expensive phone for Xiaomi, up to $1,000 US, which is roughly whatever it is going to be in UK pounds.
That's a lot for Xiaomi, yeah.
It's a lot for Xiaomi. So having a quick look at the specs, what is your take? What's exciting you, if anything, about this one?
First of all, they are, in theory, sending me a Mi 10 Pro in the next week or so, so I will get to have a play with this. But at the moment, I'm just looking at specs like you are. The main sensors, another of these 108 megapixel arrangements, f/1.7. A genuine optical zoom. It doesn't say on my spec sheet, though, what the power is. Do we know what the telephoto actually is yet?
I don't think so.
Okay, so it's all up for grabs at the moment. But assuming it's a 3x or a 5x, then you've got pretty similar performance, really, to the two phones we've just been talking about.
Looking at the fact that it is it a folded lens or not? If it's a folded lens, it's going to be 5x. If it's not, no, it's not a folded lens. I think it's a 3x.
3x, which will be absolutely fine. Come on, I've been looking at all the shots I've been taking over the last year and thinking, how much do I actually zoom? Which is why I was complaining earlier about phones which do indistinct zoom at 3 and 4 times. Almost all the zoom shots of real people and real subjects, in my experience, are at about 2 or 3 times. I only ever go to 5 times when I'm doing camera testing or when I'm at a nature park or something. So I think 3 times is absolutely fine here.
I actually agree 100%. I feel like 5x and what the P40 Pro Plus brings with a 3x and 10x. I mean, that's all overkill at that level. But, somebody's going to try it, and it's okay. That's fair.
Yeah.
But I feel like 3x, for the average person, 3x is the sweet spot, I feel.
Yeah.
And a real 3x optical. I mean, honestly, everything looks good on this. 90 hertz display. As an aside, the P40 Pro has a 90 hertz display. The Oppo Find X2 Pro has a 120 hertz display, which is also like the Galaxy's a Quad HD 1440p 2K display. And the Oppo lets you do both at the same time. If you want to kill your battery, since it also has 5G, you can run 5G and 120 hertz and Quad HD and take a lot of photos, and your battery will die quickly. But it's a big battery, so thankfully you're good with that. But I mean, look, I'm excited. I'm just bringing it up because I'm getting one, and it's finally officially available, and it's possibly for me going to be my first 108 megapixel phone because, well, I didn't get the Ultra. So kudos to them. I think it's good. I also want to add quickly that there is a Mi 10 Lite coming, and the reason I'm bringing that up is purely because it's the most affordable 5G phone in terms of pricing yet. And that's got me really excited because I'm very gung-ho about 5G low band, which is pretty commonly available in the US everywhere now. Snapdragon 765G, which is the slightly gamer version of the 765 with 5G, for €349. That's a pretty damn great price.
Yeah, and all of the Xiaomi phones, assuming you get their world editions, which is what you typically buy over here and presumably in America, they have the Google Play Store and Google services. So yet again, Huawei is the only one where you have to jump through these hoops. And given all the imaging specs of all these other great phones we're talking about, I know the P40 Pro is probably technically better as an imaging phone, but I'd rather have less hassle and a much, much easier life.
Right. And speaking of Xiaomi, I want to touch quickly on last week's, we briefly touched on it with TK Bay, the Redmi series. So Redmi is a sub-brand of Xiaomi, and the Redmi K30 Pro and K30 Pro Zoom came out.
These names.
These names. But the K series is interesting because last year the K20 Pro was a $500 or less than that. Actually, by the time when it came out, you could consistently buy it online for $350. And for K20 Pro, that meant a Snapdragon 855, a proper triple camera system in the back with a real telephoto, ultra wide and main, and all that for $350, $400 was insane. And the K30 Pro takes that and brings that to the 865 world, right? So we're looking at a phone that's going to be $500 for those specs. And there's a zoom version now that has apparently like a 3x or 5. I don't know.
Three times, yeah.
3x, yeah. So it's got a 3x zoom, whereas last year's K20 Pro had a 2x zoom.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think this is great because this is another thing that you can get with Google Play services. And I felt like if we talk to the US media amongst us, the K20 Pro last year was our go-to choice if you wanted the cheapest, most powerful phone you could buy. It was kind of like the Poco phone of its era, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do these Xiaomis have NFC for Google Pay? I haven't got that in front of me. Do you know?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, the higher end ones do. Yeah. The Redmi K20 that I have had it. By the way, they also rebrand these. So last year's K20 series, there was a 20 and a 20 Pro. It was also known as the Xiaomi Mi 9T and Xiaomi Mi 9T Pro in Europe.
Yeah.
And the only difference between the Pro and non-Pro last year was that it was a Snapdragon 730 versus a Snapdragon 855. That was the only difference. Everything else, cameras, everything was the same. And last year it used the Sony IMX586 as a main sensor. So this phone, the K20 last year, was so good that I'm really having high expectations about the K30 this year.
Yeah, and they're using MIUI, I presume they still call it, skin over Android? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same OS as Xiaomi, and again, the same GMS support and everything. Just like Oppo, the Find X2 Pro has GMS support, of course. But quickly, Nokia 8.35G. We talked about it on last week, but you're a Nokia guy like me, so what do you think?
It's not the real Nokia, though. I think you're slightly disingenuous to say I'm a Nokia guy.
I know. I kind of want to be excited, but I'm not. That's the problem. I'm looking at those specs. I'm like, okay, this is going to be an affordable 5G phone, Snapdragon 765 again. But the imaging system on that doesn't really inspire me too much. 64 megapixel main sensor. I haven't really found a 64 megapixel phone yet that I liked the quality from.
No. I don't think the imaging expertise is there. They're just slapping in this because it's got a high number of megapixels, taking almost no care over it, and the results are not very good. The biggest disappointment here, I guess, on this Nokia is it's got an LCD screen, not AMOLED.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, what's the price on this again?
$500 US-ish.
I'm sorry that at $500, £500, you need an AMOLED screen. You don't have IPS LCD. There are some jolly good IPS LCD panels, and I've got some Motorola's here around the sort of $200, $300, and they're great value for money, and they work just fine. But at £500, $500, you've got to be AMOLED, you've got to be always on display, and you've got to be at least trying to look and feel like a flagship.
It is interesting to me that the Nokia HMD Global brand, they seem to be overpriced for what you get, considering they're basically Chinese phones, right?
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to kind of leverage the Nokia brand a little too much for that. Because, you get Android One, and you get theoretical 2-year support, now, although that's not always been a good track record for them.
No.
And so I just feel like there's a lot of lip servicing going on with HMD Global's Nokia. Then I wish that was a little bit more like, can we actually get the stuff done and not talk about it as much, please? And that's been a Nokia issue forever, right? The let's get things done versus talking about them thing. They're very good at marketing, but sometimes the execution is a little lacking, right?
And let's not talk about the 9 PureView. Let's not go there again. That took an entire podcast last year.
Oh my God, what a nightmare that was. I just couldn't get into it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I unfortunately didn't have a lot of time to dig into it, but I just abandoned it because I was just like, I see the magic, but it's happening so rarely that it's not worth it for me,
Yeah. Anyway, HMD, don't talk to me anymore. I think I said some constructively critical things about the 9 PureView, and they have not talked to me once since, despite many attempts. So I'm not going to get a review in it of this. That's
petty. Yeah, I'm still have a good connection relatively with the US PR team, but we get no phones here. So it's like 3 months after its release, I'll get an 8.3. It'll be irrelevant. But I'll be able to say, hey, look, it works on every 5G network in the US. Woohoo! And speaking of which, I want to quickly talk about the T-Mobile Sprint merger before we have a second talking about the Planet Computers Astro slide. T-Mobile and Sprint have finally officially merged in the US. None of this matters to you UK listeners, but hear me out. This is important because in the US we had 4 main carriers that had a whole bunch of MVNOs attached to them, and they still do. So it looks like we have more operators in the US than 4, but really if you look at it, the essence of it is that we have 4. And now we have 3. So Sprint and T-Mobile became 1, and that makes them a juggernaut. And honestly, T-Mobile has always been the best in terms of everything for the last, I'd say since about 2012. I've been with them for 20 years, mostly because in the early days, they had really cheap data, and then they were very good at accommodating unlocked phones for a US carrier. And then when John Ledger, their current CEO that actually just exited with this merger, came on board and kind of revolutionized the brand, they really improved their network radically. Coverage and performance went up. And more importantly, customer service is still the best of any of the operators here in the US. So now them merging with Sprint, which has been a terrible kind of carrier, is a bit of a scary thing for those of us who've been with T-Mobile for a long time. Is the quality of the customer service going to stay the same? That's the big question we have. But this is an important merger because if you understand how 5G works, there is high band millimeter wave, mid band in the 2-3 gigahertz range, and low band in like the sub 1,000 megahertz range. And this is the first carrier now in the US that has coverage in all 3 because of this. So it's going to make them very relevant in the 5G space. T-Mobile alone had great low band, in fact, mostly nationwide low band 5G, and Sprint had mid band, and T-Mobile had millimeter wave as well. So now the 2 of them together gives us the whole salad, as it were, So that's kind of why it's exciting to US customers, but also really scary because Sprint wasn't a particularly great company, and them merging with a super great company, how's that going to work out, right? Planet Computers Astro Slide. What's your gut feeling on this 5G weird sliding phone from the crazy people over at Planet Computers?
Well, you remember the Gemini and the Cosmo, and the way the hinge worked, the way that the ribbon cable was kept quite simple so that there wasn't too much stress and strain. And as a result, the Gemini and the Cosmo, they've been pretty darn reliable. I've got a Gemini here that's now 1.5 years old, still working fine. But this Astro Slide, you've got this screen slides across the QWERTY keyboard towards the back on 2 big, presumably aluminium rails. And somewhere in there is a ribbon cable that's having to do a heck of a lot of work and do some fairly nifty flexing. In theory, you've got a full-screen Android smartphone where the screen slides to the side, pops up, and then becomes like a landscape QWERTY
Didn't
PDA.
HTC do that on a number of their flagships back in the day of Windows Mobile?
Yeah, but we were used to phones breaking after 6-7 months with ribbon cable failures back then as well. So, I mean, the Scions were legendary. The Nokia communicators had a fair few failures. I think these days we're rather hoping that devices last for 2, 3, even 4 years with a second owner. We're not really expecting to have to send it back because a ribbon cable failed after 9 months. And my gut feel is that I'm worried about reliability and how rickety and how rattly it might be. And of course, there's no water resistance because there's just so many gaps. But the promise of a full screen Android and a full mechanical QWERTY keyboard that's genuinely usable, the promise is absolutely there. One of my close friends has pre-ordered it. And I think he's number 4 in their database. So hopefully I'll be able to get hands-on with it and give a good review.
It's interesting, right? I had the original, whatever, the Gemini. I played with that for a while. And it was interesting, but it left me pretty cold. I mean, imaging sucked and, it wasn't, I don't know, it just didn't feel like a very polished, complete package to me. And I feel like Planet Computer's marketing is very rah, rah, rah. But again, kind of like Nokia does not really deliver in the end. I mean, I don't want to discourage these kind of boutique and niche form factors because I feel that diversity is really critical in our industry. But at the same time, I'm feeling like maybe just be a little more humble because Planet Computers really hasn't delivered that much goodness yet.
Yeah, it's all about the keyboard though, and it's not just marketing. The keyboard is, as you know from the Gemini, is genuinely outstanding. Yeah. But if you don't need a mechanical QWERTY keyboard, then every other specification in the phone, every other spec is average or middling at best. Yeah, and from imaging to sound to screen to processor to RAM, so you've got to absolutely want, lust, and desire after that keyboard. If the keyboard is just a nice to have, then it's the wrong phone for you. Get the FX Tech Pro 1 or just get a Bluetooth keyboard and use it with your iPhone or Galaxy.
Exactly, absolutely. The stowaway keyboard, everybody remember that?
I've still got one, yeah.
Yeah, me too. It's great. All right, so quick thing that I wanted on last week's show, but we didn't have time, and I'm just going to mention it and let you folks, your listeners, go to the link and check out the photos. A couple of weeks ago, Essential folded, basically, but somebody that used to work there published photos and renders of 2 phones that were one day going to be released but never did. So if you want to look at some cool phones that we never got, check out this link in the show notes. Yeah, so that's it. I want to give you a chance, Steve, to tell the audience where they can find you on the internet. Are you still writing for
Android Beat? I am still writing occasionally, but their budgets are quite limited, so they only really pay for me to do reviews of the year's flagships. So typically the Huawei and the Samsung flagships, maybe a couple of others. I also write for iPhone Hacked, which is their sister site, though, and I do reviews each year for any iPhones that come out. And all about Windows Phone is kind of winding down. But I do on stevelitchfield.com. Don't forget the T in Litchfield. So stevelitchfield.com has got links to stuff I do. And of course, my main sort of video phone show. And the much-loved, apparently, the audio podcast, which has now gone twice weekly while we're all in lockdown just to keep people entertained. And, of course, you've been a guest on that many times.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Yeah, that's what you really want to listen to is the phone show, right? And I guess there's the phone show video, right? And then there's the phone show audio. Yeah,
the idea was that we started just a video podcast. I started doing it before YouTube existed, believe it or not. I think I mentioned that last time I was on, but that's how long ago I've been doing it. But very quickly it became apparent there was just far too much to cover in just sort of 10 minutes of video, and we wanted to chat about it and bring other voices on. So for the last 11 years, we've had an audio podcast, an hour a week or so, and getting different guests on, just like you do with your show, getting different takes, different opinions. And you're just chewing the fat and a couple of geeks down the pub chatting about tech. And apart from the virtual beer, it all works very well.
Fantastic. And you folks, if you haven't listened to Steve's podcast or watched his videos, you do yourself a favor. It's worth it. If there's one constant that's been in our industry for almost 20 years now, it's Steve. So, and imaging is like me. He's a big photography fan. So check out his work, and you know where to find me on the internet. I'm at ThinkGirl, that's TNKGRL on Twitter and Instagram. That's like the comic book character without the vowels, if you forget. TNKGRL. Twitter is where you want to discuss the podcast with me. Instagram is where you want to look for photos. Photos of phones, photos taken with phones, all that photo stuff. And then there is a YouTube channel that goes along with the show called youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast. I've got some unboxing, hands-on, some review videos on there. Check it out. It's good visual content that goes along with the audio podcast. And then if you happen to listen to this show by accident, you've tuned in, you don't know, you like it, but you want to come back, please subscribe. mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL. And of course, we're on all the major podcasting platforms. And I say we is me and my guests. So Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, etc., etc. Find us, subscribe, tell your friends, all that good stuff. Same with the YouTube. Subscribe, tell your friends. And importantly, if you can review or rate the podcast on the various platforms you use, some platforms let you do that. Please do. That would help us a lot. Another thing you can do is donate. There's a donate link in the show notes. It helps us along doing this show on a regular basis. If you want to donate something, click through that link and follow the instructions. It's a PayPal donate thing. And then I want to thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible's been with us pretty much since the early days of this podcast, over 2 years now. And they're really the best platform for audiobooks out there. If you like books and for some reason you can't read a book, maybe you're a delivery driver in these crazy times and you have to dodge the zombies out there in your UPS or FedEx truck or DHL truck, you might want to listen to books at the same time still. So Audible's got you covered. I've been binging, as I said, for the last couple of podcasts on the Star Wars book, basically, adaptation of the most recent movie. And it's a 9-hour epic audiobook with sound effects and the whole 9 yards. It's really fantastic. So here's the deal. You can actually get access to Audible for free for 30 days and keep a book at the end if you click through the link in the show notes. And that supports us. That helps us. That helps us make the show. So consider it. The URL is audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. And again, there's a link in the show notes. Please click through, get your 30-day free trial. There's no obligation to stay, but if you do so, you will help us out. So I would really appreciate it if you considered it. And that's a thank you to Audible, who's been really all there all the time for us. So, Steve, thanks again for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. As I always say when I come on, I feel like we could geek out for hours, but of course your listeners wouldn't appreciate it. But thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to keep this show down to an hour 15, which is what I try. But you know what? It's only a reason for folks to come back next week. And until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with ThinQ, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.